I do not want to go into a lot of detail about the history of sexual assault, so I'll try to keep it brief. Rape was originally seen not as a crime against the woman herself, but a crime against the man who owned her. Raping someone's wife or daughter was considered damaging that man's property. The assumption that it wasn't rape unless the victim fought back, had serious injuries, yelled for help, and reported it immediately date back millennia. Biased attitudes against rape victims were baked into our country's laws. There was a prompt outcry rule, which assumed that if it was real rape, then the victim would report it immediately. Judges used to tell juries before a rape victim testified that they should treat her testimony with much skepticism because women often lie about being raped. And there used to be a corroboration requirement, requiring a victim's testimony to be corroborated, which was not the case for other crimes. Here in Minnesota, the corroboration requirement was repealed in the 1970s, but its legacy still persists, as the culture of many prosecutors' offices is still to require corroborating evidence before charging a case and seeking a conviction. I need to introduce this book, Credible: Why We Doubt Accusers and Protect Abusers by Deborah Turkheimer. She does an excellent and thorough job of going into the history of why society has such a hard time believing rape victims and the negative impact that has had on our ability to hold offenders accountable. Rape is a gendered crime. It falls under a broader term to describe any violence that is mainly perpetrated by men against women, which is called gender-based violence. 90% of rape victims are female. 99% of sex offenders are male. As gender-based violence, rape is a form of oppression and gender discrimination. This can be seen clearly in the way that rape victims are discredited and not believed from the moment they open their mouths to report the abuse. When there is oppression, there is resistance, and when there is resistance, there is backlash. Backlash from men against women reporting abuse has created what amounts to a misinformation propaganda campaign called rape myths. Rape myths are widely held genuine beliefs about rape that are factually incorrect. Rape myths fall into a few general categories: misunderstandings about the nature and science of sexual assault, attempts to undermine victim credibility, shifting blame onto the victim, absolving the offender of accountability, and showing more concern for the offender than for the victim. I'll give some examples of each. Undermining victim credibility can look like: she lied to get back at him because she regretted the sex, to get attention, to cover up some other misdeed of hers. Calling into question the victim's memory. She's remembering it wrong. She's mistaken. Calling into question the victim's sanity. She's crazy. Don't believe anything she says. There's also the just world fallacy. She must have deserved it. Shifting blame onto the victim can look like: she was asking for it because she was wearing a thong. She was flirting with him. She drank too much. She should have known better because she invited him back to her place. What did she think was going to happen? She was out walking late at night. What did she think was going to happen? Absolving the perpetrator of accountability can look like: he couldn't help himself because look at how beautiful she is, duh. He was drinking. He can't be held accountable for what he does when he's drinking. When women say no, they actually mean yes. Showing more concern for the offender than for the victim can look like: he has such a bright future. Let's talk about stereotypical rape. There is this extremely particular kind of scene that pops into someone's mind when you say the word rape. It's a stranger who jumps out of the bushes, tackles a woman out jogging, threatens her with a knife, leaves her with life-threatening injuries. The woman is seen as blameless. She cries for help, fights back against her attacker, reports the assault immediately, and is emotional, but not too emotional. The perpetrator is seen as deranged, a monster, probably already has a criminal record, not someone you would ever love or sympathize with. There's usually a ton of evidence in this fantastical scenario: torn clothing, the victim's blood and the attacker's semen, witnesses, even surveillance footage. The stereotypical rape does happen, but only a very tiny percentage of the time. It is a very small fraction of cases that resemble the stereotypical rape. Somewhere between 85 to 90% of rape is perpetrated by someone the victim knows. Most often it is a family member, a dating partner, or an acquaintance. In the 70s, there began this huge push to bring more public awareness to rape. A researcher named Mary Koss did this brilliant survey with college-age women where instead of asking them, "Have you ever been raped?" she used behavioral questions like, "Have you ever been forced to have sex when you didn't want to?" And what she found is that 1/4 of college-age women had experienced rape. They just didn't know to call it rape, because of this public perception that rape could only be perpetrated by a stranger. They started calling this rape that was perpetrated by acquaintances hidden rape or date rape, which today is known as acquaintance rape or just rape. In the 1970s, 85% of all reported rape was stranger rape. Today, 85% of reported rape is acquaintance rape. So we have seen a huge shift in the public understanding of what rape is. There were some important advancements in evidence collection that began in the 70s. One was the brand new technology of using DNA to connect a perpetrator to a crime. The other was the creation of rape kits. Rape kits were designed by a victim advocate by the name of Marty Goddard. The rape kit standardized the way nurses collected evidence from rape victims who came to the hospital after their assaults. It essentially treats the human body as a crime scene. The whole process of the rape exam, also known as a forensic nurse exam, takes about 3 hours and is incredibly invasive. Some victims have described it as being raped all over again. The nurse takes photos of injuries on every inch of the victim's body and swabs for DNA evidence under her fingernails, in her mouth, vagina, anus, and anywhere the victim reported that the perpetrator may have ejaculated. All of that evidence is packed away into a little box that is then shipped out for testing. I would like to briefly introduce the Sex Offender Registry. In the 80s and 90s in the United States, there were a series of extremely horrific instances where a child was abducted, raped, and murdered. The parents of these children pushed for the creation and then subsequent expansion of the Sex Offender Registry. The assumption behind the creation of the registry is that sex offenders are more prone to recidivism than any other group of criminal. This assumption has since been debunked by many studies, and yet the registry persists. Just about everyone convicted of a sex crime is required to register after they have been released from prison back into their community. People on the registry must appear in person at their local precinct to update their contact and address information every year, 6 months, or 3 months, depending on their tier. There are 3 tiers, which are determined by risk level. Their names, photos, and addresses are all made public on the internet. This has led to a huge amount of vigilante harassment and even murder of people on the registry. Geographic restrictions limit where registrants can live, work, or even visit. For instance, they cannot be within a certain distance of schools, daycares, parks, beaches, or anywhere children congregate. I will talk more about the Sex Offender Registry in another video, but a quick summation is that the registry has created a group of outcasts in America. It has branded them with a scarlet letter and has given license to the public to treat them with spite, hatred, fear, and malice. It has brought out the worst in humanity. In 2013, the definition of rape that is used for uniform crime reporting by the FBI was changed to be a broader definition. The old definition of rape, which had been in place for 80 years, was forcible rape. It was defined as the carnal knowledge of a female forcibly and against her will. That definition had been unchanged since 1927. It was outdated and narrow. It only included forcible male penile penetration of female vagina. The new definition is the penetration, no matter how slight, of the vagina or anus with any body part or object or oral penetration by a sex organ of another person without the consent of the victim. For the first time ever, the new definition includes any gender of victim and perpetrator, not just women being raped by men. It also recognizes that rape with an object can be as traumatic as penile vagina rape. This definition also includes instances in which the victim is unable to give consent because of temporary or permanent mental or physical incapacity. Furthermore, because many rapes are facilitated by drugs or alcohol, the new definition recognizes that a victim can be incapacitated and thus unable to consent because of ingestion of drugs or alcohol. Similarly, a victim may be legally incapable of consent because of age. The ability of the victim to give consent must be determined in accordance with individual state statutes. Physical resistance is not required on the part of the victim to demonstrate lack of consent. This is from the Department of Justice website. Before that definition change, the clearance rate for rape nationally was around 50%. After that, the clearance rate dropped and has continued to drop. This is the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's report for Minnesota for the year 2024. In this report, we can see that murder is cleared at a rate of 76%, whereas rape is cleared at a rate of 31%. The Star Tribune is a newspaper in Minnesota. Back in 2018, they did an investigative journal series called Denied Justice. It revealed the shortcomings of police and prosecutors in Minnesota that resulted in the dismally small percentage of offenders being convicted. Here on their page, they show their findings after analyzing 1,000 cases across the state. They found that of these cases, 74% were never forwarded to prosecutors, resulting in no arrests and no convictions of alleged assailants. 26% were forwarded to prosecutors. 12% of cases resulted in a sexual assault charge, and only 7% of all the reports made to police resulted in a conviction. If homicides were handled this way, people would be appalled, said retired Sergeant Elizabeth Donegan, who led sex crimes investigations in Austin, Texas. Here are some more statistics about sexual assault to get a better picture. Only about 8 to 33% of all sexual assault is reported. Somewhere between 66 and 92% of sexual assault goes unreported. Of sex offenders who have been reported, only between 2 and 7% of them are convicted. There is no accountability for 93 to 98% of reported sex offenders. When we look at all instances of sexual assault, both reported and unreported, less than 1% of sexual assault ends in conviction. There is no accountability for over 99% of sex offenders. Looking at all sexual assaults that are reported, about 40% of them are child victims, and about 60% of them are adult victims. Yet, when we look at cases that have been convicted, 80% of them involve a child victim, and only 20% of them involve an adult victim, showing that adult victims are severely underserved by the system. Of all the victims who report, about 15% of child victims get to see justice. 85% of child victims get no justice at all. Of all victims who report, about 1% of adult victims get justice. 99% of adult victims who report get no justice at all. The journal series that the Star Tribune did, called Denied Justice, was a finalist for the Pulitzer, and it generated a great deal of public outrage. This outrage led to the Attorney General putting together a working group to assess the shortcomings of our systems and suggest solutions. Individual counties such as Hennepin and Ramsey also made big promises to change things. Many of these changes were in fact very beneficial for victims. However, the bottom line of the percentage of reported cases ending in conviction did not budge. Some of the changes that were made: more trauma-informed training for police officers. Hennepin County put a prosecutor in the MPD to help answer questions about sex crimes investigations. Victims now meet with a prosecutor to discuss his or her charging decision, whether it is a charge or a decline. So, better communication between prosecutors and victims. In Ramsey County, the district attorney asked his charging prosecutor to charge the hard cases. And yet, even after all of this effort, no change has actually occurred in the number of cases that are ending in conviction. So, why is that? Well, it's because most of the changes that were made were focused on collecting more evidence or doing better investigations. But that's not actually the issue with these cases. Leadership misidentifies the problem as a problem with lack of evidence or lack of proper investigation, when the real problem with these cases is not lack of evidence, but lack of education and presence of disbelief.